With great pleasure, I announce you Steve Raye. I hope I said the last name correctly.
Yeah?
Yeah? He is obviously from the US, and he's the president and CEO of Bevology, a marketing consulting company, and has more than 2 decades experience in the drinks business. And in very short terms, he's the right guy, 3 decades. He's the right guy to go to when you want to export to the US. He worked with wineries from all over the world, from Spain, Australia, now New Zealand. He worked not only with wine, he worked also with spirits, if I understood.
And beer.
And beer, yes. So anything that gets you happy.
Yeah. And ice cream, that gets you happy too.
And now he will tell us shortly how to get to the US market. Thank you.
I'm going to put on my hat for just a moment because in addition to the work that I do as consulting, I'm also a lecturer at the University of Bologna Business School and also at Cornell University in the US, and so I'm the alcohol professor. But I'll take that off. So what we're going to do here today is give you a very condensed overview of the US market, and maybe the easiest way to think about it, it's like peeling an onion. And every time you peel a layer, there's another layer underneath, and it makes you cry, right? Because there's so many rules and regulations that don't seem to make any sense. And I think the funny thing when I was first working with somebody from Ukraine, and I was explaining all these things you can't do, and he got so frustrated and fed up, he says, wait a second, we were the communists, at least we could bribe people. We have these rules, and you need to know them. Whether you know them or not, you don't want to run afoul of them, and some of them make no sense whatsoever, but it's critical that you understand them. So I'm going to try and give you an overview of how this whole thing works together. Does it sound okay? You guys hear me in the back okay? There we go. Okay, so it all starts out in our country from Prohibition, which was in 2019. So you couldn't buy liquor, supposedly, in America between 2019 and 1919 and 1933. Of course, there was a lot of alcohol there. It was the days of, the rum runners and guys like Al Capone. And so what happened when repeal passed, the federal government and the states got together and said, hey, we need a better system to keep bums like Al Capone out of it, meaning not having vertical integration of owning production, distribution, and sales. So they created this thing called the three-tier system. You've probably heard that term about the United States. And basically the 3 tiers are the producer, who also could be the supplier, or in the case of export brands would be the importer, tier 1, if you will. Tier 2 is the wholesaler or distributor, and in the US, we use those words synonymously. I know in this country and in many other parts of Europe, there's some crossover between supplier and distributor or importer and distributor. In the US, they're very different functions. And then lastly, retailers, off-premise as we call it, and what you call HoReCa, we call on-premise. So we talk about on and off-premise. Pretty simple, right? Well, that was 85 years ago. Each of the states were given the opportunity to create their own rules and regulations, and they did. So when we start working with people, they usually ask me, well, why? And I explain why, and then we get to the next question, and they say, why? And I explain the answer, and then they ask why again. I said, you get 3, right? And the rest is, it doesn't matter why, it's how. And so when I think about what I've done with all my teaching and so forth, I also wrote a book, which you all should buy. I have a table in the back. Here's my commercial. You should buy a copy of it. I carried it all the way from New York, so please buy it so I don't have to carry it back. And it's in great detail everything that you need to know about the US market, along with charts and graphs and tools and ways to upload data and information to sites like WineSearcher, and maybe someday we'll make it work with VinePair, so that you guys can populate content online so that consumers can pull it down in ways that they want to see it. Okay, so the big thing here is you have to go through the 3-tier system as an export brand. There is no alternative. The only alternative that exists only for domestic brands, which are able to sell to consumers in some limited form. Everybody we talk to says, well, I don't want to go through the 3-tier system because somebody else is making more margin on my wine. Managing other people's margin is not the way to do business. Making money by producing and selling wine is your business. Make sure we're asking and answering the right questions. So if we look at the US as a whole, you know, we're 50 states. We also have Washington, D.C. Where's the pointer? I'll walk over to Washington, D.C., and there's a county in Maryland that operates as its own independent regulatory entity. So we have really 52 different markets. I like to say we're more Balkanized than the Balkans. That's fun. This is the first time I got to say that in the Balkans. Kind of, sort of. I'm getting, boy, my stuff's not working. So they divided the world, if you will, into control and open states. And control means the state has some manner, shape, or form of determining how products get sold. It could be on the extreme end that are like the Scandics, where they control both importation, distribution, and retail sales, or it could be something where they just control the sales of spirits. And so you'll see a map of the control states where you'll see these 17 states. This is the only map you'll see where we show that spirits are in all the light blue states, but wine only needs to be concerned with those dark blue states. And frankly, Utah, Wyoming, Mississippi, that's the last time we're ever going to say those words in a sentence. They're just totally unimportant. So the only control states for wine that matter are Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. What does that mean? Okay, so you can't look at the U.S. as one market. We're 52 different regulatory entities. It's 52 different countries. And what is legal in New York is illegal in California. And if you don't know that kind of stuff, you can run afoul of people. And the TTB, which is our regulatory entity, Tax and Trade Bureau, is in the process of enforcing a lot of infractions and catching a lot of people. Ignorance is no excuse. So let's talk about major trends and what's going on in the market. Very condensed picture of the demographics of the U.S. market. About 40% drink wine, 36% drink other alcohol. When we talk about wine in particular, females dominate. You ladies in the audience probably like that. And I would say that the purchasers of wine, not necessarily the consumers of wine, skews even more female because they're the ones that are doing the buying, which speaks to things like label design and all kinds of other things. In terms of age, this morning, Maureen, I think whether it was you, I'm not sure, we're talking about boomers and millennials. Millennials do not, well, I'll show you another one. The key that we want to focus on are what we call high-frequency drinkers, the people who are going to be drinking at least one time a week. If you're only going to buy one bottle of wine, you don't want to waste your time and energy on getting that consumer. What you do want to do is find a consumer who you can establish a relationship with, whether it's old-fashioned way of getting their email address or it's engaging in a dialogue on some web platform. And Adam's going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But so, you know, there's some breakdown in it. The big message, not only don't forget the baby boomers, that's the majority of the market in the U.S. still. So everybody's talking about millennials. That's great. We ought to market to millennials, but we cannot forget boomers because they're the ones that are paying the bills. Some of the key trends that are happening in the U.S. market, you're probably aware of it because it's happening here as well. Prosecco is huge. Sauvignon Blanc, particularly Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, is growing rapidly. That's 2-year-old data. It's up like 8% this year. Rosé is a phenomenon all around the world. And the big thing that's happening in the U.S., in addition to Cab always being strong and Pinot Noir, is red blends. In the U.S., we drank varietals. We ordered varietals. When I grew up, you would order Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay or whatever. Now we're seeing the growth of brands like The Prisoner or The Federalist with fanciful names where the variety is not even mentioned on the label. And so it requires a change in the way you market to consumers. They're no longer asking what's in it. What they want to know is what's the story behind it. And I think that's a fundamental change. We're still going to see a lot of wines out there as Cab Sauv or whatever it happens to be. But think about it. It's not what's in the bottle. It's what's the story behind it. And that's kind of the essence of marketing to Americans. So we buy by brand and type rather than varietal. Huge change from where it was 10 years ago. A complete reversal. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to come to the U.S., I want to go to the biggest market, I want to go to California and New York, that's where I want to start. No, it's not. It's probably where you want to end up and be successful, but the chances are is if you start in California and New York, that's where you'll fail because they're the most competitive markets in the world. They're 3,000 miles apart, And if you only have one person working on your brand in the US and he has a meeting in San Francisco, you just blew 3 days out of his entire schedule to do nothing. So if you're going to sell a pallet to California, why would you waste 3 days? Don't think about overall consumption. Where is the opportunity for the particular wine you're selling, or style of wine, or category? So one of the things we look at, and I don't have the chart here, but it is on my website, getusmarketready.com. I've got my business cards here. You guys can take it. Put your email address in there and you'll get access to tools. And one of the tools is market selection criteria. And I have a fully roughed out spreadsheet of all the criteria of individual markets in the US to help you figure that out. It's not anything that you can do your own, buy your own. You need some help from somebody who knows the market. But the point is, the information is out there and available. Don't think you can, as people say, paint the states. You're not coming to the US. If you're coming to New York, it's a whole different market. In New York, people can only own one store. There are no chains for liquor, and it cannot be sold in supermarkets. In California, supermarkets dominate, and it's also been pushing a lot of the prices of regular wine, if you will, more like the UK market, all right? But there are chains there, and there are dedicated, what we call independent chains. They're not really independent. Bevmo is an example. I don't know, they may have 80 some stores, but they're just a liquor company. Total Wine is another example. And one caution, I mentioned Total Wine. We don't have a national chain per se. Total Wine approximates it. I think they're in about 30 markets. They probably have 280 stores. A lot of people say, well, I want to get into the US. I want to go national. I'm going to start to sell to Total Wine. You might as well shoot yourself in the foot with an AK-47, because that's a big mistake. Because once you're in Total Wine, you're going to be at a lower price than you'll ever be able to sell in independent stores, and the independent stores are going to be really unhappy with you because you went to them first. So I like to tell people, it's not just a matter of doing the right things. You have to do the right things in the right order. I cover a lot of it in the book. On my website, bevologyinc.com, is a whole bunch of webinars and lectures I've given which go into great detail. One of them is called Lessons Learned in the US market. And there's 14 lessons learned there. And really, they were originally titled Top Mistakes Brands Make. And they usually make them in that same order. I'm pleading to you, don't make the same mistakes everybody else has already made again for the first time. I'm here to help you learn, not necessarily how to do it the right way, because there is no answer to that, but to help you not make some dumb mistakes, to give yourself a better chance at success. All right? That's the lecture. Sorry. Biggest volume states are not necessarily your targets. We talk about the best way to get a toe in the water is pick a market where you can have an influence and get yourself into about 40 to 60 to maybe 80 stores and really work that well. Create reorder rates at retail. It's all about replacements, not placements. Build that success story and then publicize that success story so that you get interested importers and wholesalers to call you and say, hey, I've been reading about this brand. I'd like to talk to you about it. The dynamics of that meeting, we just did this with a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc producer and just had fabulous results. They recognized the value of the marketing concept. We didn't even have a product. The wine was not even developed yet. We didn't have a label, but they already ordered 50,000 cases because we presented it as a solution to the problem that they saw. They needed a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand that had something unique, and at some point in time, in the next 2 months, you'll find out about what that is. Okay, the other thing is very positive. The number of wine selling locations in the US continues to go up. So green is on-premise, Horeca, as you call it, and red is off-premise. More places for people to buy more wine. Starbucks is starting to sell wine. Everybody's trying to figure out the right way to do it, but the point is it's becoming more and more available. The more available it is, the better chance you have to sell. I know this is an eye chart. What I wanted to highlight here, and I think, let's see if I did that. No, I didn't. Okay. The countries are in the main order, but these two charts, a lot of people will only look at one of these charts. They'll look at volume. But you can't look at volume without looking at value, right? So you have to look at the two together to realize what is selling, what is making profits for people, and it all boils down to, which is not on this chart, but the average dollar price for sale. And I'm going to blow your mind. You ready for this? The average dollar value for a bottle of wine in a retail store in America is approximately $10. The average bottle price for a bottle of wine sold via e-commerce, $38. And right there is one of the answers to the question of how am I going to differentiate my brand? And it isn't necessarily the brand being different. It very well could be a function of how you go to market. The problem is it's really difficult to sell through e-commerce in the United States market, but we're waiting. The Supreme Court is going to be passing judgment on a case we should hear any day now, that's the word. And if it happens as we think it will happen, it's going to change the game dramatically to make it a lot easier for consumers. Well, it's either going to be a lot easier or it's going to be a lot harder. But I think long term, the opportunity for, call them specialized brands from countries that people are not that familiar with, is going to be direct, because you have this whole issue of virtual inventory, right? You remember there used to be this chain called Blockbuster, and they could maybe store, well, take a liquor store. At best, it's going to have 5,000 SKUs. There's probably 500,000 SKUs that are sold in the United States. Nobody's going to be able to find the brand that they want if it's obscure in the local liquor store, but if they have a way to get it through some online form, find out about it by reading about it on a website, FindBear being one example, and then being able to convert that interest into a purchase and have it delivered the next day. Okay, so what does this tell you? Obviously, Romania is not on the map, but we're seeing some really interesting things. Look at Portugal. I've been working in Portugal for a couple of years now, and something is really happening there. We saw the same thing happen with Greece. It took a while, no, I'm sorry, not Greece, Austria, but then also Greece has been following suit too. So you can't tell me people can't pronounce the grape varietal. Gruner Veltliner, yeah, we can learn, all right? Fatiesca, we can learn, all right? Portuguese, Toriga Nacional, Fernão Pires, that's hard, that sh sound for us is really hard, but look what's going on, they're selling. South Africa, a perennial problem. Not blaming it on you, Giles. Even Spain, and the problem is that Spain is such a producer of bulk and volume wine that they end up being their worst enemy. And we're seeing a major change. If you look at the difference here between volume in Australia, down 12%. Well, this is a compound annual growth rate, but it's down by half. What that means is the cheap wines of Australia are getting out of the system, if you will, and now we're seeing a lot more growth in upper-end Australian wines. But you would only see that if you looked at a chart like this. Okay, another piece of really, really great news. The average price of wine, or the price of wine category segment that is growing is between, call it $10 and $20. And that's a price point that you guys can make some money on. What we tell people is, don't play this game. This is where Gallo and some of the big jug wine producers, you can't win at that game because it's all about production, distribution, cost efficiencies, and that's something you will never benefit from. So the good news is, you can make some money at that level, and a quick rule of thumb in pricing in America, take your ex-seller price, convert it to dollars, multiply by 3.4. So if it's let's call it in euros. If it's 3 euros, ex-seller is going to be roughly $12 on the shelf. One of the other tools that I have on my website, free for everybody who wants it, is a usable Excel spreadsheet that is a prototype price structure built on New York State pricing, because each state has its own unique sales taxes. And you do need to do pricing in each state, but it'll allow you to get a real understanding of how the three-tier system margins get impacted and how a €3 wine turns out to be $12 at retail. So the sweet spot for wine is $11.99 to $19.99, and you can make money on that. This is Nielsen, which is, I'm not going to go into it. Okay, the issue here is the size of the sphere indicates the size of the market, and its position relative to the axes, and certainly from the origin, is whether it's it's changing. So the more you are up here, it's growing rapidly, and you can see where Rosé is there. It's off the chart, just about. A couple of things that I think are important. We were talking about this the other night. Riesling. I'm a diehard Riesling fan. I don't know what the problem is. Nobody in America drinks it, and maybe I should just stop talking about it. Okay, but Sauvignon Blanc, sparkling wine, hey, that's Prosecco, and the impact that Prosecco has had on all sparkling wines, whether they're champagnes, cremants, or American sparklers, or whatever. All of a sudden, Americans are now looking at sparkling wine as an everyday drink to have with food, not necessarily only for celebration. Pinot Noir, we've all seen that one growing, and Chardonnay is still the big one. A lot of people say, oh, Chardonnay is over with. Anything but Chardonnay. It's still the big daddy. It's still the most called for wine on premise. It's still the most purchased wine off premise. That's not to say that you guys should be producing international wines. But I think one of the strategies that I've seen and talked to a lot of people about here is blending Fatiasca and some of the other varietals with international varietals to give a point of reference and familiarity, but to add some difference to say, this is like this, but it's different in this way, and then they can tell the story. That it's not that foreign, because to us, Romania is pretty foreign. Yeah, so obviously that's where you want to be. Okay, millennials. I'm going to take you to task here and argue with you, Warren. So this is a report by the Silicon Valley Bank. The guy behind it is named Rob McMillan. He's a real sage in the U.S. industry. His bias is towards domestic producers because he's in California, so a lot of what he talks about really speaks to the American market. But what's interesting here is this is the volume or the share of purchase by age cohort, and what you can see is boomers still represent the largest share. What we're seeing with millennials is they would like to buy more, they would like to buy more expensive, but they simply don't have the money to do that. We are overgeneralizing here. This is absolutely the future, no question about it, but if you want to make some money right now, don't forget these guys, people like me. Okay, let's talk about importing and distribution, and we'll start with definitions. So an importer is someone who is licensed to import a wine brand from a supplier outside the U.S. into the United States. And by the way, you guys are going to be able to get copies of this presentation as well as the PDF as well as the video and all that. And all of this is in my book and available both in print and electronic format. And did I say it is for sale? Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay. Anyway, so license to import a wine from the U.S. may or may not have distributor licenses or operations in individual states. Oftentimes you'll hear, well, Winebow is both an importer and a distributor. No, they're not. Winebow Group is one company. They have Winebow Distributing and they have Winebow Importing, two separate companies, and the way they're structured is they're owned by different entities. So there is some overlap, but the clarity from the government and the way business has to be structured, they have to be separate entities. It's almost like it almost doesn't really matter anymore. And I'll give you an example. This Sauvignon Blanc project that we work with, we're going through a national importer, which was not our original plan, but they have an existing distribution network. So from day one, we can be in 17 states without having to have a meeting with the distributor because the importer's doing it for us. Were we to go on our own, which was the original plan, we now have to set up a distribution agreement with one distributor in every state, and that's going to take forever to get done. So distributor and wholesaler, as we talk about it, are synonymous. And just explaining what they're all about. Okay, so now that you know that, the way to think about the U.S. market, and I need a better visual, where's Mel? Mel, I need some help, is to think about the U.S. as a series of 3 locked gates in sequence. And at the end of that is a brick wall, right? The first gate is the importer, second gate is the distributor, third gate is the on and off premise retailer, and the brick wall is the consumer. So when people say, when I ask them, what are you looking for? And I've talked to a number of people here today. They say, I'm looking, oh, there you are. We'll talk. I'm looking for an importer. No, you're not. You're looking for an import solution that is one of 4 parts. And if all you do is work on that one part, you're just going to get up to a lock gate and you're just going to be stuck dead again. So even if you get your product into the US, it goes in a warehouse, what are you gonna do with it? You gotta get it distributed. Even if you get it distributed, you gotta get it out and get it sold or available for sale for the consumer. And if you do that, how are you going to get past the brick wall of a gazillion messages coming to consumers all over the place to say, buy this wine now and here. So when we talk about this, you need a holistic strategy for how do I come to the US market, not how do I get an importer for the US market. All of the failures I've seen are because people don't take this into account. They say, oh, I met this guy at a trade fair. He's from Oklahoma. He said he's going to distribute my product. Da-da-da-da. Already you said distribute. It's like, I know exactly where that's going. Nowhere good. Okay, and the scale of it is significant too. If you think about it, 30 years ago, when I first started in the business, it was 1989, there were about 7,500 wholesalers. There's about 550 today. There's a lot of consolidation. So that means fewer people who are able to say yes, fewer places for you to put your products. Yes, there's been growth in retail and restaurant. I showed you that chart earlier. And obviously, it's been tremendous growth in producers. 30 years ago, it was France, Italy, Spain, maybe a little bit of Germany. Now it's Chile, Argentina, Australia, Romania. And Greece and Portugal and all the rest of that. So the constriction in the middle is really what's driving market entry strategies for producers. You have to recognize this is a problem, and you need a solution to it before you go just picking up the phone and say, hello, I'm looking for somebody to sell my wines in the US. Now I'm going to really depress you, all right? There are 10 options for importing your wine in the US. Here's the bad news. They all suck. None of them is what you want. What you want is what we would call an agency brand, a large national importer who will take on the responsibility for everything for that brand. All you got to do is sell it to them, containers go to their warehouse, you wash your hands of it, and the person that buys it is then responsible for marketing and selling it. Nobody wants to do that anymore because if they don't own the brand, why would they want to invest all that capital in terms of people and money into something that they don't own? So private label, control label have really grown as a strategy as a result of this. The important thing, and I don't have the time here today to go into detail, but I do go into it in the book, which is for, I told you, okay. But there's pros and cons for each one. I'm just going to pick one up at right here. People come to me and they say, I'm looking for an importer in the US. My answer is, I got 5 guaranteed to say yes right now. I'll give you the phone number. Actually, I'll dial it for you. I'll call the guy who is going to say yes. And that's these guys. They're national licensing import services. And all they do is like leasing a car, right? They will get your COLA label. They will get your product, the freight forwarding, consolidated, through customs and into a warehouse. That's great. And now all we have is call them lazy assets, not making any money, but actually costing you money because you're paying for monthly storage costs in warehousing. The point is, if you're looking for an importer and you need a simple answer, the answer is yes right there. It's not the solution, but it answers the question you have. Each one of these is another narrow strategy that may or may not be right for you. There isn't any one strategy that's right for everybody in this audience. And in fact, for many of you in this audience, maybe 2 or 3 of these strategies may be the right way to go. What I tell people is, look, think about your importer solution in 2 levels. One is somebody who will import my brand now, and my forever importers, like a foster child and an adopted child, okay? They're temporarily in that home. There's not a lot of love necessarily there. But it at least gets you physically here. So if you have, your son is going and just graduating from NYU in wine management and he's living in New York, okay, that's a compelling asset that you can leverage to say, okay, I can maybe make that one work for me where you might not be able to make that work because you don't have somebody in the system. You can go control and private label brand I talked about, and then there's also this whole new strategy of non-traditional importation and distribution. And one I want to point out is called LibDib. It's short for Liberation Distribution. Completely new take on the way distribution is handled in the US. Far too complicated for me to explain now. Actually, it's far too complicated for me to understand, but I'm working with the people who are doing it, and we think it's a brilliant opportunity for small, hand-produced brands like Liliac, for example, would be a perfect candidate for this, where you would manage to be able to keep much of the margin without having to manage the margin for anybody else. So you got to look at other options. It's a whole lecture and course in itself. These are the 5 that I talked about. Again, you're getting the printed copy of the presentation. They all say yes. They're all variations on a theme, and they're roughly all the same cost. If you said which one is better, you're going to meet them and you're going to say, which guy do I like better? I've worked with all of them. They're all great. Okay, big lesson here in that everybody never gets, and even people in the industry don't get. Distribution in the United States is not free. Just because you sold your brand to an importer doesn't mean that they're going to put it out through the marketplace. You're going to have to allocate money for in-market support. And I have a glossary, and I think we may be even handing it out to people, to attendees here, in the book of things like DAs, depletion allowances, SPA, special purchase allowance, all kinds of different price support vehicles that it is expected that the supplier will provide to manage the price, the retail price of the product. It's cash that's going into a giant black hole unless you know how to manage your importer. And what we see a lot of times is people making a deal with an importer, not getting a contract, not getting any agreements in place about what kind of reporting they're going to be getting, and then the brand doesn't sell and everybody blames everybody else. We believe real strongly, and again, there's a whole chapter in the book of stuff you need to negotiate with. You don't necessarily need a formal contract, but you absolutely do need a written or email agreement that says, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this, I'm going to be able to see sales and costs and all this stuff at whatever basis, real time all the way up to monthly, to know what's going on. I've seen too many cases where the wholesaler, and in some cases the importer, hides that from the supplier. I can guarantee you if they're hiding that from you, they're stealing from you. It's just the way it works. Because if they weren't, they would share it with you. So when people say, well, what do I tell people when I first call them in the US? If you have the answer to this question, what are you going to do to help your brand? And you're proactive in telling that. So market visits. I'm going to come to the market 4 times a year, 6 times a year. I'm going to do work with. We're going to do dinners at restaurants, and we'll bring the winemaker over and all that kind of stuff. We're going to participate in all your holiday programs. We're going to have a dedicated in-store tasting program. We're going to put our product in people's mouths because we know that if you get them to taste it, the chances of buying it are much, much higher. And we hold the people who do the tasting events accountable. We look for a 30% conversion rate, which means 30% of the people who taste it buy it. The best promotion in the world is an in-store tasting. One of the criteria that we use in determining which markets you want to go into are those where in-store tastings are legal. There's about 20 states where they're not legal. Don't go there because you can't use your best tool. And it's also your most directly affected tool. Did somebody have a question there? I know I talk fast, but I'm from New York. What can I do? I said that there was consolidation in distribution. Another eye chart, I recognize that. What you need to notice here is that 4 guys now control 75% of the market, and they don't want to talk to you. Even these guys are pretty darn big. They're almost billion-dollar companies, and they're all functioning under the same challenges of saying out way too many brands, and as they consolidate, they're dumping brands that don't sell. So they're not really open unless you come to them with a very, very compelling proposition that answers the biggest question they have is, why should I take the risk of selling your product? Show me how you can reduce my risk of spending my time and my people's time and energy on your brand as opposed to the brands that are already making me money. And if you don't have the answer to that question, don't take the meeting. You have to have that story filled out. So distribution's getting more challenging. You got to be more creative in the way that you go to market. So every brand that we work in, we have a different strategy. And each one, it's a path, right? You break that trail, great. That you can't go down that trail anymore. You have to come up with something new for the next guy. LibDib is one that I talked about, and you can look it up online. It is what it is. Okay, so a couple of other things, words to the wise. Manage your expectations. A lot of times I talk to people and they say, you know, what is your objective? Oh, I want to sell 100,000 cases. Oh, you got, no, you don't. Okay, maybe you want successful entry into the U.S. You need to have some intermediate steps that are achievable because you're not going to get to. What was the line we heard somebody was saying this morning? Selling wine is really easy. You just got to get the first 200 years right. You know, that's the same thing. It's going to take you a while to get up there. So if you have proper expectations, I'm only going to go into one market. I want to be successful in 60 markets, and I want to have meetings, proactive meetings with distributors in my 3 target states. Those become reasonable business objectives that can be achieved, and note that they have nothing to do with sales. Sales and revenue are not going to be a part of it, and you cannot fund growth out of revenue. You can't fund growth out of profits because there won't be any, and you can't fund growth out of revenue because you'll be spending more than you're contributing. It's the way it works. You're going to be 2 to 4 years, you're going to be spending more than you're going to be pulling out. So if your goal is to, I'm just going to seed it and let the whole thing run, not going to work. I talked about the importance of measurement. Set specific metrics, hold people accountable for them in process while it's happening. Don't wait till the end of the year and say, well, you know, you missed your sales target. If you didn't tell me that in May, I can't help you in November. Another one very common, don't pull your support from existing markets as you grow. People will say, oh, I was really successful in my introductory market of Tennessee. Now we're going into Atlanta. We're pulling all of our funding out of Tennessee. Tennessee's going to drop like a stone. You can't just pull out of a market. It's incremental investment. None of this is necessarily what you want to hear. The U.S. is a very expensive market to get into. And then I talked a little bit about this, actively communicate with and to both your importers and your distributors to make sure they're telling you some critical stuff. I'll give one example. Account sold reports. We were working with somebody and we were trying to untangle them from a mess. And we asked them, can you give us an account sold report? A big red flag went up in their head. They said, if they're asking for an account sold report, that means they're pulling the brand. So I'm not going to give it to them. And all of a sudden, we have this combative relationship. They think we're going to pull the brand. And now they've dropped all their support of it. We shouldn't have asked that question then at the time. When you do your original agreements in the book, make sure you detail what kind of reporting and what kind of access to data they're going to have. Account sold reports is your data. And if you decide you want to pull the brand or you want to do some marketing and tie in with Adam and do a program and you can tie in particular people, that's an asset you have. You should have access to that. I see it all the time. A lot of people, you know, the distributor said they're not going to give me that information. That's a problem. So finding an importer and distributor is just the beginning. It's not even near the end, right? So what do importers and distributors want? And I guarantee you the answer is not going to be wine from Romania. I never heard that. Okay, what they want is suppliers that are prepared for the United States market, that understand the US market and all the complications of it. If not that you could give a lecture on it, but that when somebody says the word franchise state, you don't say, what's that? Because they already know right away that's a clue that you don't know what you're talking about. Again, it's in the book. We use the phrase, what's in it for me? WIIFM. They want to know what's the benefit to them. They don't want to know how great your wine is or when your grandfather started the farm or how you till the soil or how you do any of that kind of stuff. How am I going to make money with minimal risk by selling your brands? That's what I want to hear. That's the first thing that you need to come to them and control your message that way. Second, understand the 3-tier system and its implications, everything from price structure, margins, who's responsible for what. Don't be surprised, for example, when somebody comes to you and say, oh, we've got a DA program going on and you owe us $5,000. I've seen that happen. The right chemistry, and maybe this is the key to the whole thing. You need to have a positive vibe with the people that you're dealing with. A couple of times where we've been brought in to help, call it decouple somebody from an importer or a wholesaler, it's like dealing with a divorcing couple. I mean, it's a lot more than the divorce that's on the table. They hate each other, and you're not even part of it. But there's so much energy going in there, and it's all negative energy. You don't want that. Brands that they are looking for versus brands that you want to sell. Case in point, I'll use that Sauvignon Blanc as an example. Happened to be a particular importer, started up a new division, boutique, specialty, family-produced, higher-end wines. There's 1 million Sauvignon Blancs in the world. We managed to contact him at the right time in the right place for some right reasons, because I was at WSWA. I won't go into what that means. It's in the book. But they were looking for a Sauvignon Blanc that had a story behind it. We happened to have that, along with the kind of support that it needed to be. We got a yes overnight. And from the first meeting, which was the end of March, April, was April 15th, we will be on sale August 15th with a brand that currently does not exist. The wine is not made yet. They just harvested it, vinified it, and now they're going to blend it. So that's a pretty cool story. So it can be done if you do it the right way. And a little bit of luck, but luck happens. There's a great line by our comedian, filmmaker, Woody Allen. He said, 90% of success is just showing up. That's the reason that I'm here, because it isn't serendipity. Serendipity happens because you make it happen. We're here and we meet. They want brands with a point of difference that makes a difference. It's a point of difference that makes a difference, not that I make a better Brunello di Montalcino, okay? It makes a difference to them as well as to the consumer. I'm going to give you a brand that's going to give you 5% more margin than the other ones that you're selling. Now you're talking my language, okay? But that requires an understanding of their, how they do price structures and all that kind of stuff. It also could be we have, I'm making it up, Gaia is going to be coming to town, and we're going to do, you can build your whole portfolio programs around our star celebrity winemaker, stuff like that. The point of difference that makes a difference is different for the trade than it is consumer. The trade message is, how are you going to make money and how are you going to reduce risk? The message to the trade is the story about, the history and authenticity and, that stuff. They want to see your passion and your commitment. They want to, I use this analogy, and I have it in the book too. It's the difference between the two English words, involvement and commitment. Imagine if you're having breakfast of bacon and eggs, okay? The chicken is involved. The pig is committed. It's not working. This is some of my best stuff. Who booked this joint, huh? Anyway, but they want to see your passion and commitment. They want you to show them that you understand their business, you've done your homework, and that you're going to make this happen, and you're going to carry the load. And frankly, the best example of that I've seen here today, or since I've been in Romania, is that guy and Simona. It's their commitment to making this happen that made it happen. You guys all followed through, which is great, and they needed that, but they made it happen. It wouldn't have happened without them. So thank you for that, by the way. Okay, so the message you're trying to get to those people, you can't say it. You got to get them to think it is, you are different not only in the products that you offer, but the way that you go to market. And there is no right answer for everybody. There certainly isn't the same answer for anybody, much less everybody. And to try and say, this is what we're going to do as Romania, can't be. Liliac has to be doing something different because you're a smaller producer, boutique brands, da-da-da-da-da. And some of the other producers, have different reasons for being. You have to kind of know yourself. I'm going to zip through this because how are we doing on time? Am I over? Just about over? I'm okay? It's not okay? Finish. That's what you mean? Okay, I'll zip through this and just reference it. Again, a lot of this is in the presentation. If somebody can, big thing is alcoholic beverages have about 4% penetration in the U.S. Shoes and books and stuff like that is more like 60, 80%, right? This is a huge gap. People want to buy online. You can't do it in wine and spirits. Maybe you will be with the Supreme Court thing. We think that represents potential. And potential is useless unless it's accomplished, but that's where the future is. Whether it's today, tomorrow, next year, or 2 years, it is going to happen. And take my word for it, within 2 years, we will have that. And pot will be legal in New York State. The other thing to think about is online access to news and recommendations. Everybody always talks about, especially in Europe, Wine Spectator. Think about it this way. Wine Spectator circulation is 400,000. Wine Enthusiasts, the two main wine publications in the US, 250,000. VinePair gets 10 million unique visitors per month. Wine Searcher has 34 million people who have downloaded the program. You're talking orders of magnitude increase and ability to reach mass markets of people who are not wine geeks. That's who's going to buy your wine. The wine geeks are not going to buy it. So whether it's, these happen to be, I won't go into the detail, but they're all variations on how to do direct selling to consumers legally in the United States. First thing is it can't be done, and that's how. Okay. God, those charts are fuzzy. Okay, this one I think is really important. This came from the Silicon Valley Bank report. This is the number of cases a winery sells. Very few, up to 2,000, then it goes up to, I don't know, 50,000 or something here. And this is the amount of sales that are direct to the consumers, because in America, you can sell through the cellar door and through cellar clubs, right? The only way the small producers are getting any time or attention and being able to sell, they got the same problems you have. Distributors don't want to carry them, because there's not enough margin in it, there's not enough volume and not enough growth. So DTC, direct to consumer, we think is going to be the future. And as I pointed out, DTC also means a higher bottle price, imported and more actual cash. Here's an interesting factoid. Imported wine penetration in the US is around 24 to 26%, depending on who you talk to. Wine.com, which is one of the primary e-commerce factors or sites, 53%. It's double it, right? So if you're selling an imported wine, you want to sell it on a platform where people are used to going for imported wine. What that tells you is they're looking for the stuff they can't get in their regular store. That now takes your negative and turns it into a positive. I talked about, okay, I was wrong. I said 38, it's 39.70. You can make some money here, all right? I talk a little bit, or I'll just reference this, the difference between inter and intrastate wines. I won't go into detail, but I will just say inter means you can sell it to, a retailer could sell wine to a consumer in another state. This means, by e-commerce, a retailer can sell wine to a consumer in their state. E-commerce is alive and well and doing just fine, thank you very much, in the United States. There's ways of doing business in the US if you understand the system. All kinds of, we don't have time for this. It's really good, though. You should read the book. The other book that I would recommend that people get is a friend of mine, Deborah Gray. Actually, she was the one who kind of was one of the inspirations for me to write mine. The way I talk about it is, her book is all about how, and she gives a lot more detail and practical stuff, so I would buy both together. Well, you can't buy them together, but buy both. Mine is about how else. So what I try and do is say, apply all the creativity and experience I have in finding our way around these things, and that's kind of what the book is about. And you can buy mine. First thing you should do is get scored. I'm going to zip through these. These are the competitions in the US that accept entries from products that are not currently imported from the US. So the excuse, well, my product's not imported, so I can't get a review. Wrong, you can. The first thing you need to do is this, get scored. Because the first question you're going to get asked by anybody is, do you have any scores? And if the answer is no, the conversation just ended, right? Trade events, there really aren't any in the US. There's a couple of things that I would caution against, the World Wine Meetings and World's Leading Wines. They basically are pay-to-play matchmaking things. Yeah, they kind of work, but they're expensive. Texom, if you're an on-premise oriented thing, like Iliac, that's something you should be thinking about. And ECRM Marketplace is another one that's kind of interesting to major buyers. I'm speaking at it in August in New Orleans, and I'll have a better idea of what that's all about once I get it. On my site, in the book, is a link to all the trade events, is a link to all of the competitions that you can enter, and also is a link to, these are the newsletters that are important in the United States. You should subscribe to all of them, certainly the free ones. There's a couple, I make a point about whether they're free. They're free. You read those over a period of 2 to 3 weeks or a month, you're going to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the US. You're going to start to understand the language and what's going on. You'll be so much better off than people who don't. There's a whole thing that you need to do, which is to optimize your online visibility. We don't have time, maybe a cocktail hour, I'll share that with you. But here's the thing. You have the passion to drive the creativity necessary to produce and market a truly unique wine. Now you got to take those same skills and apply them to selling it if you want to market in the United States. Get your brand rated and reviewed. Recognize that building the brand is your job. You're not going to give it to somebody else. Adopt non-traditional marketing tools like wine apps, delivery within an hour, different ways. Be on top of how consumers, because the consumers who are on the cutting edge are the ones who are potentially going to buy Romanian wine. And consider the best route to market. It isn't New York and California. That's one thing I can guarantee for everybody in this room. Those are not your initial target markets. There's my contact information. I'm done. I'll take some questions. We have 5 minutes, I think, for questions, yeah?
So, questions, anyone?
Oh, come on. Somebody has a question.
I have a question, if it's fine. I would start with a question, yes. After you explained all this stuff, why should anyone export to the US?
Now you sound like my wife. She said, Steve, you make it sound like it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's happening every day. And I'm working with clients who are not just making it happen or being extremely successful. And that Sauvignon Blanc is just one example of it. This is very self-serving. I get that, right? You need a guide. You need somebody to help you wend your way through this because you probably won't be successful if you do. But we've worked with many brands that have been successful and have established themselves, and it's a long road up. But yes, it can be done. What I try and say is don't make the same mistakes others have made before you again for the first time. Get some help, whether it's me or somebody else who knows what they're doing in the U.S. market. But you can't really manage it from Romania. But you can be successful is the answer, and you can make a lot of money because we're the biggest wine market in the world. Does that answer your question?
Quite well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of money do you need just to make a start, let's say, to support the first year of? Just for the people that are really into this.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm going to give a really snotty answer. It's how long is a piece of string, right? Who knows? I've seen it. I've seen it done before with as little as $10,000, and I've worked twice with 2 billionaires, guys who have $2 billion, who have put 30 million in the market and failed. Okay, it's not necessarily a function of money, but if money is, if being able to, if you can't say I'm going to put $50,000 aside to get my feet wet at least for a couple of years, then don't. My recommendation is if all you got is $10,000, buy a ticket to Las Vegas, put it all on red. You have better odds. And it's the best answer. It doesn't require money. It requires being smart. For that the Sauvignon Blanc thing, we didn't spend any money other than their consulting fees for me. Not a penny. Not a penny. Another question. Come on, I know I've raised all kinds of issues. Somebody wants to ask me about e-commerce? No?
I would have another question.
Shoot.
What's your biggest success story? What was your biggest success on the US market with a foreign brand?
So far as of today, it's that Sauvignon Blanc success story because we're going to launch, and don't tell anybody this, okay? It's just entre nous, right? We're going to be, everything happened and everything happened right. I've been successful with a lot of other brands, but they haven't gone like this. So we've worked with a couple of spirit brands from South America. What we've been trying to do is help people find a niche. I guess the biggest success would be the country of Austria. We've worked with them for about 10 years. When I first started working with them, nobody knew the difference between Austria and Australia. We talk about mit and mit-out kangaroos. Right now, Grüne Veltliner is on the wine list for all restaurants in New York City and California, and it's a very well-respected thing, and they're not selling anything under $10. So what we had to do for Austria is very different because their situation is different than yours. They only export 25% of what they make, and they don't make a lot. They have a very limited amount. Gave them a very different strategy of how to proceed. They used the SOMS strategy by using the SOMS as the point of leverage to the community. Adam and I have been talking about that. I don't know that that's the right thing to do. In fact, I think it's probably not the right thing to do, that those aren't the people who are going to buy your wines. You want to talk to the cutting edge leading people who are online and being the influencers. And I'm not talking about the people who make money for being an influencer online. I'm talking about people who actually do influence other people's. Charlie said this was a good brand. There's a chart that's in there. I flipped over it. Something like 80%, or the most useful way to market wine is personal recommendations from a friend. And whatever happens on the internet is the equivalent of that. Okay? We're it.
Any more questions? Then please, thank you very much. Buy his book. And we see after 10 minutes with Giles and branding. So it will be nice. Thank you.